When defining a component, you need to understand that this component might live in a desktop environment or a mobile environment. It might have touch, it might not have touch. So there are various things that you need to prepare for when developing your component to ensure that it works everywhere. In this video, we are going to specifically look at the adaptive layout and how can I write my component to load specific UI for specific environments. In this instance, we are just going to deal with mobile versus desktop. It's the most common instance. You can also have sub-instances where desktop being the biggest screen space, mobile representing a phone, but you can have tablets and laptops. And so adaptive design says I want to load a particular HTML layout based upon the screen size that this thing is going to be displayed on. Desktop environments, as an example, have a lot more real estate. If I swap this to mobile, you'll see that it has a lot less real estate. So instead of making it responsive, meaning that the same layout shifts with CSS according to the environment that you have, adaptive says I've got one set of layout design for the desktop version. I've got a completely separate design for the mobile version. And sometimes you need to do this. The best case scenario is that you use responsive, so you can reuse the same HTML and just shift things around. But what do I do when I really do need to have a very separate design for the environment that I'm looking at? Here I've actually moved to the mobile version. When I refresh it, you'll see it now says mobile version. And it's two separate files that I'm using. So when I go to the desktop version and I refresh and it says desktop version, it's one set of HTML that I'm loading. And when I'm going to the mobile version and I refresh, it's a completely different set of HTML that I'm loading, though it is the same component. Question is, how do I do that? The loading and unloading of the HTML is easy enough. We have the stock standard component HTML that has the desktop version in it. We also have a component with exactly the same name characteristics, except it has .mobi.html, meaning that this is the mobile version. And here you can see it says mobile version, and then on the desktop it's desktop version. So that's trick number one. We're keeping with the same convention of a code where we want to reuse the same name as the component, but in this case we also just have that Mobi stuck in there. The second part that you need is you need to know, am I on desktop or am I on mobile? So here we have a read-only property on our component. This just makes it easier for us to check whether or not we're working on a desktop or mobile environment. And this piece of code you can pretty much just use here as it is. When you want to have more fine-grained checking, Android, iOS, Chrome, Firefox, you can still use the same kind of code to do that. But in this case, we just want to keep it simple and say, are we working on a mobile device or not? And this suffices quite happily to do that. The next part here is that since I'm using a bindable element, I want to use the import meta URL replace code, but I want to change things up a little bit. So if it is a mobile device, then I want to replace the .js with a .mobi.html, and if it's not, then just use the standard .html. So the convention here is that both of these files have the same name as the component, and we're swapping the .js out with either .html or .mobi.html, and this happens when the component is loaded. Therefore, check if it's a mobile device, load the appropriate HTML, and you're off to the races. So doing adaptive design on a component level is actually quite easy, provided that you use the right sort of conventions.